Let's implement this simple React component, a button with a numeric label, and clicking that button increments its numeric label to count how many times the button was clicked. Ready to do that? Don't worry, we'll take it one step at a time. First, let me tell you about this interface that you see here. Before you can create a React application, you'll need to do some environment configurations, and that might be a bit overwhelming for someone who is just starting to explore. Before we go that route, we'll use this interface that I specially created for this course. It will help you learn the React way without the complexities of configuring a ton of tools to have a React environment. This playground is a good first step for quickly exploring React, but it stops being useful once the size of your application grows. This is why the last module of this course will be about configuring your own React environment. But until we're ready for that, we'll use this playground. This is the point in the course where you need to start doing things with me and not just watch me. Go to jscomplete.com/playground and follow along with what I do. I kept this interface as simple as possible. You have an editor and a display. You type in some JavaScript code in the editor, for example, math.random, and you press Ctrl Enter, and your code will be executed and its result displayed on the right, just like a simple REPL, run eval print loop, that you can use to test quick JavaScript expressions. To show more things in the display, you can use the HTML element with the ID of mount node. You can grab a reference to this element using document.getElement by ID and specify mount node as the ID. This is a DOM API call to select the display element. And once you do that, anything you put inside this mount node HTML element will be displayed to the right. The more important thing about this playground is that the latest version of both React and React DOM are already preloaded here. In addition, the playground understands the JSX syntax. And it will also work with the modern JavaScript features, which we will be using with React. Guess what I used to build this playground? React, of course. You can actually tell that this playground is written in React looking at this little icon here in my browser. This icon is coming from the React DevTools extension, which is something you should install right away, by the way. So if you don't have this icon in your browser, pause the video right here and go Google for React DevTools extension and add the extension to your browser. Once the extension is active, relaunch the JS Complete Playground and make sure the icon is showing up here. The React DevTools extension allows us to inspect and interact with any React application on any website. Let's inspect the JS Complete Playground while we're here. Open your browser's DevTools. There should now be a new tab for React. This has been added by the React DevTools extension. You'll see that the extension is showing up two nodes here. The weird one is the main component for the JS Complete Playground React app. You don't see normal component names here because the code is minified, but you can still see the structure of the app, and you can see the properties and state of every component in the DOM tree, and you can interact with everything here. For example, this editor area here can be resized by dragging the separator, and this UI state is managed with React. If you can find the component responsible for that, you'll see how there is a state element that gets changed when the separator is dragged. You can even change this state directly from the DevTools and trigger the resize based on the new value. How cool is that? Take a moment and familiarize yourself with this extension. It is going to be a great asset for you when you start writing React applications. Every video in this course will start with a URL at jsdrops.com that will take you to the starting point of that video. This way you can start from the exact point where I am, and if you're coding along in a video and your code did not work as expected at the end of the video, you can simply compare your code to the code available when you go to the next JSDrops URL in sequence. Here is the first URL. If you go to jsdrops.com/rgs1.1, RGS is for React Getting Started, you should see the exact code that I now have on the screen. Make sure that works for you. When this code is executed, you should see a Hello React line in the display. Let me go over what is going on here. We have a simple React function component named hello. It returns a div. This component has no input. It's also a pure component, no state here. To display a React component in a browser, we need to instruct the React DOM library on how to do that. The function designed to do that is React DOM.render, which takes in two arguments. The first is the component to render. In our case, it is the hello component. Look how I used it here as if it was just another DOM element with a self-closing tag. The second argument to the React DOM render function is the DOM element in the browser where we wish the React component to show up. In this playground, we're using the mount node display element. If we're to do this in a regular React environment, this element has to exist in the already rendered HTML before this code. You can think of this element as the entry point for React. We're telling React to take over this element and render all of the content within it. Time for another interview question. Explain what exactly is going on here on line 2. How are we writing HTML inside a JavaScript function? And why is this working and not throwing an error? This is not valid JavaScript. If you copy this code and try to execute it anywhere JavaScript can be executed, it will throw an error for sure. However, in the playground, the code works fine because the playground is equipped with a special JavaScript extension named JSX. That should be the gist of your answer. This line is not HTML. It is JSX. It will not be executed by the browser. It will be executed by the JSX extension and compiled to something else, something the browser can understand. This absolutely means that what this browser is currently executing is not what you see on the screen. The playground is using a special compiler named Babel to convert JSX into React API calls. You can see exactly what Babel is doing to our JSX if you go to the Babel REPL here under Try It Out, make sure this React preset is selected, and paste in here the JSX value that we're testing in the playground. Babel compiles that into a call to the createElement function in the React top level API. That's it. That's the magic of JSX. You write what looks like HTML, and Babel convert it into React API calls. So in the code example we have here, the browser is not really executing this. Instead, it's executing the following: react.createElement, and this takes many arguments. The first argument is the element to be created, in this case a div. The second argument is any attributes this element will have. The div element has no attributes. And the third argument is the child of that div element. In our case, it's just a string hello React. Let me add a few more here to make sure this is working. And go ahead and execute this. And check it out. It is working. You see this line in React applications, but the browser is really executing this line instead. And this is true here as well. This line is also JSX. In this case, the conversion would be react.createElement, and it is a hello element here. This is not an HTML element. This is a React element. And it also doesn't have any attributes, and it doesn't have any children. So this is the equivalent line in this case, and this will work as well. While you can totally use React this way without JSX, it would be a lot harder to code and maintain. So let's stick with JSX. Let's now update this code to make it into the button counter example that I showed you at the beginning of this video. Instead of a hello component, let's name our component button, uppercase B button. You'll have to do this change to the function name and where we used it here in the JSX line, button. Instead of returning a div, let's make it return a button HTML element, lowercase button here. Start that button's label as test. Control Enter to execute, and you should see a button with a label of test. Now, I intentionally rendered a button component and a button element in this example. This is to make you aware that the capitalization here is not optional. React has some rules here. A component name has to start with an uppercase letter. Because if you don't do that, React will think you meant an HTML element. For example, if we named our React component lowercase b button and tried to render that here, React will just render an empty button element here, and it will really not use this function up here at all. This is a beginner mistake. Always name your components with an uppercase first letter. This rendered button here is not interactive yet. To make it so, we'll need to introduce some state to this component. We'll use the simple and powerful React hooks to do that in the next video.